Chapter 1. Of Kurds, Curses, and Jam. Quote, in the area of Iraq that was liberated from Saddam Hussein's control the earliest, the Kurdish provinces in the northeast part of the country, all objective observers seem to agree that an unprecedented prosperity has replaced what was once an unimaginable wasteland of misery. With their head start of liberation beginning in 1992, the Kurds have nonetheless set an example for the rest of the region, as well as of the country. Christopher Hitchens. We have jam, but we have no jam. I smiled when I heard these words. I had heard them before. I had not expected to hear them aboard a Royal Jordanian jet flying high above the Syrian desert. Perhaps I had not heard them at all. It was that artificial morning that comes after a long overnight flight eastward from the United States. I had just awakened and was disoriented. Moments before, flight attendants had cheerily urged passengers to greet the new day by opening their window shades. It was an evil suggestion. Lasers of light shot through the dark cabin. I shielded my eyes against this assault and tried to locate the face that belonged to those familiar words. Slowly, I pieced the previous moments together in my mind. Breakfast was being served. The British gentleman next to me, having already eaten all the jam willingly surrendered by passengers nearby, went in search of more. He inquired of a flight attendant. This is what occasioned that memorable sentence. "We have jam," the woman said in the stoic civility of her profession, "but we have no jam." The words were a subtle study in metaphysics. Jam exists in the universe, she was saying, but it does not exist on this flight. While my British friend grumbled his displeasure, I thought back to the first time I had heard the unusual phrases. It was nearly 20 years before. I remember that I was asked to speak at a conference in the Iraqi city of Erbil. In those days, both Iraq and the Kurds who populated Erbil were in a tense season, pressed as they were between wars, between alliances, and between competing visions of Kurdish destiny. It was the early 1990s. The Persian Gulf War had ended only a few years before. A civil war had since erupted between the two dominant Kurdish political parties. To nearly everyone's surprise, Saddam Hussein still threatened from the south, the coalition of nations that drove him from Kuwait having chosen not to drive him from power. Then there was the grief that hung thickly over northern Iraq. The Kurds prefer the name Kurdistan, from the loss of tens of thousands of lives. Many of these were victims of chemical weapons. Others were shot, starved, landmined, or tortured to death. Nearly all were Kurdish victims of the Iraqi regime of Saddam Hussein. In the Erbil of that turbulent time, I joined my fellow conference leaders at our hotel restaurant for breakfast one morning. During the laborious process of ordering food through bits and pieces of an unfamiliar language, a friend asked our waiter if there was jam. "We have jam," the man said brightly, eyebrows raised and teeth gleaming beneath an impeccably trimmed mustache, eager to confirm the sweet luxury existed in his land. "But we have no jam." These last words were said with an almost mock expression of sadness, as though to assure my fellow teacher that all who knew the glories of jam, Kurdish jam lovers in particular, shared his disappointment. I remember that we were grateful for the waiter's quick disappearance into the kitchen. We would not have offended for the world, but we could not have held our laughter much longer, given the contradictory words and the practiced way the waiter said them. We have jam, but there is no jam. Jam exists, but it does not exist here. The spirit of jam is with us, but not the incarnation. For the remainder of that breakfast, we enjoyed trying out humorous variations on those words. It was all great fun, and it continued as the story of the waiter's single sentence was recounted over the following days. It was good for a laugh, but soon something more began to emerge. With each retelling, the waiter's words seemed to take on a broader meaning. They quickly became a type of shorthand for the unfortunate truth that the world often disappoints, that the promise and the reality of life are frequently two very different things. If the lights went out during a lecture, as they regularly did in those days, someone was sure to shout from the dark, "We have jam, but we have no jam." An explosion of laughter would follow. Heads would nod as though in agreement with some inside knowledge denied to the outer world. It was the same if the hotel ran out of hot water or if some security threat proved an inconvenience. In the larger gatherings, the words became a humorous liturgy of discontent. "We have jam," those sitting on one side of the room would offer, "but we have no jam," came the rejoinder from the other side, and so it went for days. In time, the waiter's seemingly insignificant phrases took on a harsher meaning. They began to invoke all the aching realities of the Kurds, the ironies of Kurdish life, the betrayals and tragedies that marked the Kurdish place in the world. It was as though the whole of the Kurdish plight distilled into those 8 words. We have jam, but we have no jam. This is because we are a people, but we are no people. We are a nation, but we have no nation. We have friends, but in truth, we have no friends at all in the world. The words began to sting. From their innocent first mention at that breakfast, they were redeployed into a euphemism for the whole of the curse history has flung upon the Kurds. I knew this was true when on the last day of the conference someone used the familiar sentence once again. There were weary, forced grunts of laughter. It was all getting a bit old. Yet I happened to glance at an American friend just then, and I saw the tears forming in his eyes. This new meaning had become too much for him, loving the Kurds as he did. He could no longer stoically endure the tension between what existed in the world and what existed for the Kurds in those days. He was grieved for a people who knew there was jam in the world, but who never seemed to have any of their own. Remembering the origins of the jam story caused me to recall, too, the dangerous, war-ravaged place that Kurdistan was in the 1990s. To be among the Kurds in the northern Iraq of those days was to be in the middle of a civil war while the troops of a tyrant amassed on a nearby border. Economic sanctions added to the general miseries by making life disease-ridden and spare. Makeshift checkpoints punctuated cratered roads. So quickly could fighting erupt that men carried their Kalashnikov machine guns while strolling markets with their families. Grocery stores were seldom more than shelf-lined half-huts, partially rebuilt from loose stones and rubble. Streets were muddy and crowded. The sound of explosions nearby cleared them instantly. Jets and helicopters flew deafeningly overhead while those on the ground prayed Saddam Hussein had not sent them. Tragedies mounted upon the Kurds. Medicines were difficult to obtain, and diseases were often left to run their devastating course. Landmines dotted the landscape, particularly in those areas where Kurds grew food. This was a gift of the Iraqi regime. Stories circulated about flocks of sheep wandering harmlessly over mines that were then triggered by the shepherds who followed behind. Limbs were lost, as were lives. Survival became in part about detecting threats by sound alone. There were the low, rumbling sounds of heavier weapons echoing in the hills or some plane far away. These signaled little threat. Still, it was wise to listen for changes. It was also wise to listen carefully to the light machine gun fire that sometimes pierced the night from nearby neighborhoods. It was wise to listen, but there was little to be done about it except to pray against ricochets and try to sleep. The tension was suffocating. The Asayish, the Kurdish secret police, were understandably ever present. During one idle afternoon in an Erbil hotel, I decided to stick my video camera out the window to film some of the landscape. Despite the fact that I was on the 7th floor and it was a cloudy day, a squad of Asayish appeared at my door within minutes to ask whom I was working for. I tried to explain, with the help of my interpreter, that I was working for 2 children back home who were eager to understand what Daddy was doing in Iraq. The Asayish weren't having it. They confiscated my film cartridges and told me to restrict my picture-taking to the restaurant. This ever-present tension could give way to extreme danger without warning. One of the worst of our experiences occurred as we were attempting to cross the border from Turkey into Kurdistan late one afternoon. As the sun was starting to set, and we were submitting our papers to border guards, a unit of Kurdish PKK guerrillas began shooting at the Turks. Tracer fires sizzled through the air in great arcs of light. Machine guns answered from sandbagged positions. Idiot that I am, I stood to watch it all until one of the men on our team shouted me to the ground. It was all over in seconds. Fearing a second attack, the Turks decided to close the border. We found ourselves then effectively locked out of Kurdistan and forced to spend the night in a region which made me think of the old American West supplied with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs. We found rooms in a seedy, war-ravaged town called Salopi. Sleep came in short bursts, kept at bay by soldiers creeping warily through the streets, periodic exchanges of gunfire, and, sometimes far worse, silence. It was just this intermittent nature of danger that could prove deadly. Because Kurdistan was embroiled in a guerrilla war rather than a hot war, it was easy to forget where you were. On one occasion, our team met at length with Kurdish officials in a mountaintop complex. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room revealed the stunning scenery. I had lived near the Alps in my youth, but had never seen such drama of snow and stone. Weary and yet transfixed by the view, I could barely concentrate on the business before us. I sipped tea and relaxed on a leather divan, while other team members pressed a case of one kind or another. I had drifted far away, peaceful and unknowing, when a U.S. F-16 fighter jet roared into view and began circling. So violent were the percussions from the jet's engines that windows rattled and tea sloshed in cups. The wings were turned so steeply and the pilot flew so near that it was as though he was leaning in at high speeds to catch bits of our conversation. I was thrust back to the realities of time and space. I'm in a war zone. I am kept alive mainly by an invisible thing called the no-fly zone. Try to pay attention, Stephen.